Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining us from across the globe for Delta Capita's latest webinar titled From Risk to Impact, Embracing Sustainability within UK Financial Services, where we will talk about everything good and bad about sustainability and ESG. My name is Karan Kapoor, and I'm the Global Head of Regulatory Consulting at Delta Capita. We are a global consulting, technology, and managed services provider, and we work with the world's leading financial services institutions, supporting them to increase efficiency, reduce cost, drive innovation, and be more compliant with regulatory obligations, including various ESG topics. ESG is now more than a buzzword, and firms need to start taking it more seriously than ever before. UK banks and other financial services firms are facing increasing pressure today from multiple directions, from customers, regulators, and investors, who are encouraging the adoption of more robust sustainability and ESG strategies and even more compliance with ESG regulations. Customers are paying more attention to how their money is being used and what good it can do and does for the climate and society. Investors want to mitigate risk and increase returns through investing in firms with robust ESG frameworks and visions and ambitions. And data shows that valuations are higher for firms who consider ESG in their core strategy and abide by it. The regulator continues to make regulatory compliance more demanding through various regimes such as the SFDR, carbon emissions reporting requirements, the TCFD rules, the Modern Slavery Act, and even more focus on a firm's gender pay gap data, and many more. Regulators have also started handing out large fines to firms for a number of reasons, including greenwashing. Firms need to constantly reinvent themselves to stay differentiated amongst their peers, and ESG is more commonly being used as a lever than ever before. To discuss this and much more, we are joined by our very esteemed panelists today from Cynergy Bank, Perigon Partners, and Delta Capita, who are very passionate about this topic. I can't wait to have the discussion and debate on this webinar. Now, I'm going to invite the panelists to provide a little bit of an introduction to themselves, their roles, and their organizations. Starting with Sharon, can I invite you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I'm Sharon Maguire. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Cynergy Bank. So we are a bank for small, medium-sized businesses. I'm also responsible for the ESG strategy at the bank. I've done about 25 years in financial services, and I have worked for a range of banks from what I call the big banks, such as Citigroup, the NatWests, Abbey National, which means I'm showing my age somewhat, and also the internet startups back in the day. So started up Kahoot, and also spent a number of years working for Egg as well. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today.
So yeah, my name is Nick Walford. I have spent substantially all of my career in bank strategy, working in and leading strategy and corporate finance teams. About 2 years ago, I set up with my business partner, I set up Perigon Partners, which is a boutique consultancy firm that offers financial services companies and general partners advice about ESG strategy, sustainability strategy, how to mitigate ESG risk and find useful and beneficial opportunities for positive impact. And we do that in the UK mainly. So that's me, Karan. Thank you.
I too was a career banker, many years at JP Morgan and subsequently at Barclays in a variety of global roles. Most recently, I joined Delta Capita 3 years ago and have been the Chief Sustainability Officer here since last year.
Now, moving into the crux of the conversation, I'm going to ask some interesting questions to the panelists. But before that, this is a very relaxed conversation. It's an open discussion. There is no PowerPoint. So we're going to keep it quite fluid and hope to get the most insights out as possible. So the first question that I want to raise to the panelists is, as firms start thinking about ESG strategy and shaping their priorities, what are the things that should be key and front and center to this thought process, and what are the things that they should be doing? Dan, why don't I start with yourself based on your role here at Delta and also the roles that you've played at other organizations?
Sure. Thanks, Karan. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, financial institutions globally don't have the luxury of ignoring sustainability ESG. It's a hot topic across the globe. The regulators continue to refine the standards. But it's really important not to have an ESG strategy that is disconnected from the business strategy. They have to be intertwined. In fact, it's almost more important for the people who are assigned to tackle this topic on your behalf to really understand the mechanics of the business and the operation, more so than the specifics of how carbon emissions get calculated or what the latest regulations are that impact their business. It has to be completely knit together. That said, no firm wants to run afoul of the regulations, and ESG, an important aspect of ESG is risk management. It's important to emphasize that building a strategy around ESG can't be done in isolation also. We like to say that ESG is a team sport. Not only does it involve the obvious people in risk and compliance and legal, it also needs to involve the people in marketing and product. And it needs to really be integrated with the way you build your overall business strategy. Done right, financial services firms have the opportunity to go beyond just simple compliance and really make ESG a differentiator in their business for their brand and drive really significant positive impact. Not so much just by risk management, not so much by regulatory compliance, but actually drive real financial benefit off the back of their ESG strategy. So your question was around what are the basic building blocks that UK financial institutions or financial institutions globally need to have and the associated priorities. So number one, a good place to start is establishing the as-is baseline. What are you already doing? What do you already know about your carbon footprint? What do you already know about the demographics of your workforce, your governance policies and practices around compliance? What is your geographic footprint because your business activities? Because the regulations that apply uniquely to a UK financial institution are much broader for those who operate outside on a global basis. So step one is really this sort of baseline analysis. Next, it can be really useful to conduct a double materiality analysis. This involves reaching out to a whole spectrum of stakeholders in your organization and your investors and your clients to gauge their priorities and their ambitions around ESG, as well as identifying both the risks, the downside, and the opportunities, the upside. The materiality analysis allows you to define what your ambitions are, as well as agreeing what your goals and your KPIs will be. So that's 2. 3 is all of the baseline work, which will contribute to building a strategy for how you're going to accomplish those goals and achieve your sustainability ambitions. Having those goals well quantified, having them time-bound, having toll gates along the way in terms of how you're going to progress the organization is really key. 4th, most of us know that one of the biggest challenges around ESG is data. Collecting the right data, points from a myriad of different sources, validating that data, analyzing what it tells you about your progress against your goals, and then, of course, reporting the results to a variety of different audiences who all have different interests. You need to have confidence in the relevance and the validity of the data to avoid charges of greenwashing. 5th, closing any gaps in your ESG performance and achieving your goals will require a lot of project discipline, as well as some resourcing. And that resourcing might not be investment, it may be time, it may be talent that you have to contribute. And then finally, there's the need for stakeholder engagement. How do you educate and engage your staff? How do you integrate your ESG performance into your customer proposition and your brand? How do you demonstrate the value to your investors? So I guess just to sum up and close out my answer to your question, It's no accident that we called this webinar Risk to Impact. ESG can be an important aspect of your business strategy and really drive lasting positive value. I think over to you, Nick, because I know you've had some specific experience, not just on your own, but with a variety of clients.
Just to add a couple of key things to what Diane has outlined there, all of which I agree with. If I take it right back up to sort of 40,000 feet for a second, I think there are two key things I'd add, as I think they're both critical. The first is to know your obligations from your discretionary effort. So you need to be very clear on what is required and what will soon be required from an action and a disclosure point of view. What thresholds might you be about to creep across, and what actions to support, what reporting obligations do you then have once you cross those thresholds? That way you can sort of plan your actions and be sure that you're not going to come up short against any of the regulatory and disclosure requirements that you will have as an organization, particularly one of your competitors, be those about modern slavery or streamlined energy and carbon reporting, TCFD, SDR, the list goes on and on and on and on. So being very clear about that, I think, is probably the first of the basic building blocks that I would recommend. And the second is to be proportionate, which I suspect is going to be my watchword for the webcast. If I paraphrase the sort of someone who I used to study a while ago, the grandfather of strategic planning, a guy called Karl von Clausewitz, who was a Prussian general. He said that strategy, if I paraphrase, he said strategy is the necessary response to the inescapable reality of limited resources. And anyone that works in a sustainability team will understand what limited resources are, because usually, in my experience, sustainability teams are relatively small and they have relatively limited access to budget and other resources. And so proportionality is pretty important as you start thinking about how to deploy against what is a wide agenda. So the first thing is, and Diane touched on this, is to be sure of what is material to your organization. What are the genuine ESG risks that you have, and what are the opportunities for impact? And I would recommend every time undertaking a materiality assessment, whether you do it yourself in-house or whether you ask for assistance and get someone else to help, because it will galvanize efforts across the organization once you know what is genuinely material to you. The second is to avoid overreaching and setting overly ambitious targets or too many targets. Monitoring and attempting to hit loads of targets, or constantly relitigating whether you're on or off track against a large number of KPIs is not going to be a good use of time. So I'd be selective about what you choose as your targets and how you set those. And the third is that you don't sign up to every single charter and agency and everything else that you can think of. There's a temptation for everyone to sign up to all sorts of different bodies and agencies, either global or to do with the UK. You'll quickly spend a vast proportion of your time filling in questionnaires and making sure that your organization is hitting its reporting requirements for each of those. And it can be very, very easy to be persuaded by board or exec colleagues who have seen that Bank X has signed up to Charter Y and got positive coverage in the FT about it, and we want some of that too, that agenda continually keeps expanding as people encourage you to do more and more. So the sort of final thing about that proportionality is that sustainability is a potentially quite sprawling agenda. It touches a lot of stuff in an organization. And so being very structured and determined about what you will and cannot yet do will be key to the way in which you succeed.
Thank you, Nick. It would be great to hear from yourself, Sharon, obviously as a leader in an organization that has invested a lot of effort and time, and is continuing to invest a lot of time and effort into the ESG strategy as a whole. How would you say that you have, how did you think about the process and where you're going next?
Look, Diane said this right at the start. So the big thing that I would say, as we've worked on this, is it is absolutely essential to integrate it into your long-term strategic framework. And so we have thought about ensuring that it is integrated into the bank's vision and into the bank's purpose. And I think ultimately what I mean by this is you've got to ensure that your sustainability strategy is aligned with the commercial strategy. And it certainly can't be at odds with it, but it also shouldn't be on the side, if that makes sense. So it needs to be additive to delivering the commercial strategy. And for us, that's been really essential in terms of ensuring that, it is bought into from an organization perspective. I think you've also got to think about winning the hearts and minds of customers as well as colleagues. So as well as, there's lots of things in ESG that are just kind of feel like the right thing to do, but you need to make sure that it really resonates with your stakeholders. And, our recent work looked at, obviously, many of the things that Diane and Nick have talked about, but, it looked at, what do we need to do from a regulatory perspective, of course? What are our current sustainability efforts? How do we compare with our peers? But importantly, all of us have said this, so perhaps if everyone only takes away one thing from this session, it's the importance of the materiality assessment. So we spent a lot of time on a materiality assessment with our customers and with our colleagues to really understand what mattered most to them. And I think what this has meant is that when we've then built our strategy and then when we're starting to execute that strategy, we're credible in the eyes of, both the people within the organization, our key stakeholders and our board members, as well as with our customers. And it really resonates with them. So for me, the materiality piece is actually, the key to success and understanding what's going to be more relevant for your business sector and also the overall operating context. And I think perhaps, worth sharing as well in terms of how we've structured it, because so I personally really like to keep things as simple as possible. And sometimes to Nick's point, I think, ESG can become really overcomplicated. So, in terms of the basics for us of implementation, we have kept it simplified around a very clear framework, which has 3 tiers. So by having this 3-tiered framework, it allows us to invest our time, our people and resources and any investment into the right tiers at the right moment. And also the order of that is incredibly important. So our kind of tier that is the foundation of that framework is compliance, of course. So yes, our ticket to the game, as a bank, we've got to ensure that we're compliant. We want to make sure that we're compliant. And then layering onto the second tier of that framework is what we refer to as credibility. And basically, that's a series of what we call hygiene factors that we think are kind of essential to the foundation of any robust sustainability strategy. And what I'd add here, though, is given that the landscape appears to be ever changing in this space, the effort required actually to address the credibility layer really shouldn't be underestimated by people. So we've included in that credibility layer things like setting our net zero targets very clearly with a clear timeline as to how we're going to get there, how we're going to measure them on that journey. We've also included things such as TCFD. So it's not mandatory for us today, and it's not mandatory for all companies today. But we believe that, it will become mandatory, that it's not going anywhere, but it's also good practice. So we want to get ahead of the game. We think that demonstrates good credibility as well. And then on top of that, there's what I call the obvious things around product and service innovation in terms of what our customers would be expecting. And then at the very top of that framework is what we internally refer to as kind of bold moves. But they're really the differentiators for us. So what are the big things that we can do that would really differentiate Cynergy from our peers and also, enhance enterprise value ultimately? So the layering of that allows us to really focus on making sure we get each of the levels done at the right moment, and we build upon them as we go.
Thank you so much for that candid answer as well, Sharon. I think it's very useful, and hopefully our viewers got some very useful takeaways from this as well. For me personally, I think understanding what really matters to your customers, your organization, and your colleagues, and being strategic about how your ESG strategy links with your business goals is, I think, quite key. And also kind of like not complicating matters is quite important, because it can get out of hand very quickly if not thought of in a structured manner and think about the things that are most important. So I think that those are quite useful takeaways. One thing that you mentioned, Sharon, you spoke about bold moves. I know in this time, banks specifically are faced with a massively increasing competitive landscape where you've got to differentiate yourself at every single step. How have you at Cynergy Bank thought about using ESG as a differentiator, as a lever, and as you mentioned, the bold moves? How have you come about that? And can you just shed some light on the types of bold moves that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to bold moves, it's quite a fun bit to start thinking about, right? You can get really innovative in this space, and it gets really interesting. I think what I would say fundamentally, it needs to be genuine and authentic for your organization. So for me, authenticity is absolutely key for it to be meaningful and to be able to kind of create lasting change. So I think when you think about your bold moves, you need to think about what aligns to your commercial business, what aligns to your core value proposition. So you don't kind of suddenly get taken into what I would call sort of unrelated waters, or things that might not resonate with your brand, or back to the materiality assessment, might not resonate with your customers or with the colleagues within the organization. So how we tried to think about it was, a number of different ideas, that we talked about and that we looked at, but how we tried to think about it was, what are we really good at today? So what do we excel at today as an organization, and how are we meeting our customers' needs? And then where can you build on your existing skills and strengths and better support customers but with their business, and better support them to do business more sustainably? So I think it goes back to that, what really matters to customers and colleagues and resonates, but also thinking about how you build on your relevant skill sets to get there. And I think the other thing I just want to say on the bold moves, I think is really, really important, is you need to make sure that your organization, frankly, has got skin in the game on this. So, your board and your shareholders need to be really willing to invest in this. So I kind of call it, you've got to be serious about this. So whether that's people or time or money, but it absolutely needs buy-in from the top. And so for us, it's been a real journey with the board that we have taken them on. We have a dedicated non-exec director at our bank who is dedicated to supporting this journey. But what he is able to do is not just kind of support us and then be at the table when we're talking about ESG, but he is able to be that voice at the table, at board, that brings ESG into all of the strategic conversations. So it goes back to that point that your sustainability strategy has to be fitting with your commercial strategy. So I think having that very senior support and presence at the table is really important. And then I think, kind of going back to the bold move piece, what we also thought about, okay, where are our core skills, where are our strengths and capabilities, what can we do more of better in a more sustainable way, but also how do we drive impact outside of our organization? So, kind of beyond our own four walls, what is it that we can do either through our customer base or our supply chain or the wider community that can have real lasting impact? Because when you're a smaller organization like we are, actually, it can have a limited benefit in terms of your sort of direct operational impacts. And it's thinking about where is there a space that we can genuinely own, and just being acutely aware of what impact can you have outside of your own four walls. And then I think finally, I'd say on the bold moves as well, it's important that you and your stakeholders and your board also have some appetite for risk in this space, because this is a new space. It can't be, in my opinion, it can't necessarily be measured in the traditional sense that we might measure other product launches. That it can be measured and there are outcomes, but not in the same traditional way. And I think you need an attitude and a mindset of, testing and learning and being agile and flexing as you move through this.
It's clear that Cynergy Bank has been thinking about this in the right way, very structured. Nick, could I ask you whether you see differences or similarities in the way other organizations are responding to this or dealing with this of this question with your hat on, working across the market with other clients?
So I think there is an understandable need for people to want to differentiate. There is an opportunity here. I'm going to reinforce some of the things that Sharon's just said, which I very strongly believe are true. There are some opportunities here for individual companies to make sure that they are differentiating and that they are effectively benefiting from that differentiation in the market through marketing effort, through acquiring more customers, et cetera, et cetera. You've kind of asked at the beginning how firms should approach differentiation, what Sharon has referred to as bold moves in the way in which Cynergy have thought about implementing differentiation. And my answer really is kind of twofold. And I think this is the way in which I'm seeing the most successful deploying. The answer is really to be resolutely commercial about it. I spent a long time running strategy teams, and the strategies and plans that we defined were measured in commercial terms. Customer numbers, engagement, income, return on equity, rare off, whatever it was. Loads of, generally speaking, financial, but some also non-financial measures. Defining how your organization wants to differentiate itself in its sustainability agenda needs to be similarly sharp. What will ally best with the commercial goals of the company and enhance financial and non-financial measures is the way in which I would approach that differentiation or kind of bold move discussion. And it might sound very mercenary in the realm of generating positive environmental and social impact, but it need not be. Aligning, as Sharon said, aligning your ESG and your impact objectives and plans with the sort of core of your commercial endeavor is the best way to ensure that they have the greatest relevance for your colleagues and for your customers, and that they align everyone's interests in commercial and investment prioritization discussions, which means that your plans stand the greatest chance at actually being championed. So aligning everything that you want to do in order to differentiate in a kind of sustainability context with what you do commercially is really the best way to make them succeed. And that particularly needs to be the case for things that you are trying to differentiate in. So to use that bold move terminology, they need to be the actions that unite the organization in having a positive impact. Now, if you're a retail bank, and I've worked in retail banks for a long time, so I feel I can be critical as well as championing, setting bold ambitions in relation to, let's say, the eradication of inner city poverty is a more compelling and better aligned bold move to have, better aligned with commercial strategy than it might be, let's say, supporting one of the UK's large cancer charities, regardless of how worthy that cause is. It's more aligned to the way in which you might approach product development, approach customer, interaction, et cetera, and therefore it's more likely to be able to gain a lot more credence within your organization as something you are trying to sort of differentiate on. The second thought that I have here is that we are consistently light on real innovation in financial services, particularly actually in retail banking. Differentiation and recognition will come from those really who are brave enough to innovate quite hard. And as Sharon kind of implied in what she said a little while ago, there's no innovation without failure. And so that therefore requires risk acceptance, and that tends to stymie innovation in banking. As by way of example, today's green mortgages are not innovative things. They may have felt so at the beginning, but they're not really innovative things, and therefore they've not really offered any enduring differentiation to anybody. They merely rewarded a home buyer for a decision they'd already made, which was to buy a low energy house. So I think my advice on the innovation side, as Sharon's indicated they went through at Cynergy, is start small, break some things, and try to solve some real customer problems in radical ways that might encourage sort of positive impact. That's what I've got to say on all of that, Karan.
So that's really useful. I think approaching differentiation in a way where you can actually make lasting impact is very important, but at the same time finding that balance between innovation and also your own commercial goals becomes quite key as firms progress further into their ESG or through their ESG ambitions. And I think keeping an eye on the ultimate goal is important, which as organizations needs to be some form of commercial success in line with the impact and all the good that you can do for society. So I think that's really useful. Thank you, Nick. You spoke about innovation, and Diane, I would like to direct the next question to yourself. As the ESG topic becomes more heated up, the race to innovation keeps continuing. And obviously, there are lots and lots of fintechs, the buzzword in the market again, fintechs, regtechs, all of that other good stuff that's in the market where firms are talking about innovative solutions. Almost gets to a point that firms are spoiled with so much choice that they don't know how to navigate and really run after the innovation that matters. What is your advice for firms who are looking into this space? Because I know you've been inundated in your role with so many new fintechs that come to you on a daily basis as Chief Sustainability Officer at Delta.
Absolutely true. And ESG is such a hot topic that it is creating this huge proliferation of service providers, whether they're in data analytics and reporting using AI, whether they're in third-party assurance. And of course, the ground underneath our feet keeps changing because the regulatory environment changes. And so it is important for firms to consider how will they benefit from partnering with some of these companies that can give them the innovative technology that allows them to collect and analyze, collate the data that is such an important part of ESG and reporting. Similarly, how important is it to bring somebody in for third-party assurance so that you have confidence in the credibility of your data and you've got some kind of outside validation of your performance and the work that you're doing. But finding the right partnerships is challenging for exactly the reasons you cited. There's so many different providers in this space, from the big four audit firms to really small but innovative startups who recognize that there's a lot of challenge and opportunity in this space and are finding ways to derive solutions. The obvious thing is each firm needs to think about, what's the right answer for you? Is it that your biggest challenge is around data aggregation and analytics, and then there's a whole suite of different companies that can help you, whether it's on trying to figure out your carbon footprint or trying to improve the diversity of your workforce or trying to address any of a number of different topics that are part of this broad spectrum sustainability space. I think many companies are finding, and many banking firms, financial services firms are finding, they want the benefit of third-party assurance. So they want to bring another third party in, an innovative third party in, who's going to help them with that data aggregation, but also give them confidence that the work that they're doing is on track.
Makes complete sense. I think finding the right partner and then investing in that partnership becomes important, because in a constantly moving target, it's tempting to keep changing direction. But I think committing to one partnership and really investing the time and energy and getting the right value out of that partnership probably becomes more relevant for this topic than any other.
You're exactly right. Or it may be a suite of different partnerships. You may have a different provider who's helping you with your carbon emissions versus your data aggregation versus your third-party assurance. And so thinking about that patchwork quilt and what your needs are and how to best address those needs is key.
The next question, before I open up for audience Q&A, is either for Nick or Sharon, yourself, whoever feels more closely attached to this question. So Nick, you obviously mentioned about innovative products within the banking sector, green bonds, etc. And I know, Sharon, you've been working within your organization, coming up with a number of innovations around your product offering. What is the importance of providing more innovative green products in the banking domain, and where do you see the future of this going?
Beyond just ESG, I mean, the importance of product innovation overall is absolutely critical. So the needs of customers are shifting all of the time. So I think the need to be able to identify and address new opportunities that are being created, matters to the success of any business, even outside of ESG. And maybe the way I look at it from an ESG perspective is I think ESG provides one of those opportunities for product differentiation, if that makes sense, because through identifying the needs or what resonates with our customers and the needs of their businesses from an ESG perspective allows us to take, more vanilla product offerings and think, how do we then innovate and differentiate those products to suit? Because it's becoming more and more clear that consumers, really want to understand the impact of their choices and the impact that their choices are having on the world. And there's a lot of demand for real transparency in this space. So I think the ESG itself offers you the opportunity for differentiation. And perhaps the other thing I would add as well is when we talk about sort of product innovation, I also think, particularly for ESG, that there is something to think about here around communication innovation. So I think one of the biggest risks around ESG is how well and how innovatively you are able to communicate what you're doing to have real impact. So often people are focused on the product, but they're not thinking about how do I actually get that message out to market and through which channels do I do that in terms of really innovating in this space as well. So I think bringing those two things together also really matter in terms of broadening your reach, and then broadening goes back to the point I made earlier, but broadening your impact from just your own organization to thinking much more widely across communities and the wider world.
Karan, you kind of saved the biggest question till last in a way. The place I'd start from is financial services is often the conduit through which government and regulator encourage change at a sort of consumer and corporate level. Yeah. So capital is deployed in order to try and benefit the economy, but also capital can be restricted in order to try and change behaviors. And that is what is happening at the moment, is that the regulators are attempting to change consumer and corporate behavior through the way in which banks might be encouraged to deploy product, and to do that such that they can encourage people to change the behaviors around the way in which they emit and their carbon footprints, for example. So the example I gave earlier on of green mortgages, for example. But there is a kind of urgent need to mobilize capital now at a large scale in order to meet net zero. And while that is starting to happen more and more in the corporate space, because financed emissions calculations are punitive on lending to sort of heavily emitting industries, for example, it's slower to happen within the consumer space. And that's really where I think product innovation will continue, which is to say, as banks try to encourage lower emissions so that their own financed emissions are lower, so that effectively the charge on them is lower. That will extend from being an issue which is directed mainly at corporates and very largely emitting corporates now to being something which everybody in society is going to be encouraged through banking product to engage with, so that mobilization of capital can drive towards net zero. Somewhat convoluted answer, so apologies.
No, that's quite interesting. Thank you, Nick. The conversation took longer than expected, so we are getting lots of questions, but unfortunately we won't be able to answer all of them. We will, however, write up answers to these questions and share them with the audience. But I would like to raise one particularly controversial question. Somebody asks that the current geopolitical climate and the UK cost of living crisis has provoked the question of, is ESG dead? I would love to hear the opinions of this group on that statement. Why don't we start with yourself, Diane?
There is a lot of noise on that. I agree. To me, the focus of ESG has necessarily shifted. As recently as 5 or 6 years ago, a huge focus was on the environmental piece and the climate crisis and carbon emissions. And that continues to be important. But I think the most relevant aspect of ESG today, particularly in today's economic environment, is actually the least sexy of the three, which is the G element. Do companies have the right controls in place? Do they have the right policies in place and the right compliance mechanisms? Are they tracking compliance? I mean, the risks in today's environment, whether they are operational risks, economic risks, geopolitical risks, are so high that I think a lot of the focus has shifted to the G element. And I think even investors are looking much more closely at the G element when they evaluate different investment alternatives to make sure that from a risk standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, from a performance standpoint, these potential investments, these companies that are under consideration for investment really have the right discipline around governance. It doesn't diminish the fact that the E and the S elements are important, but I think there's an understandable and appropriate focus more on the G element.
How about yourself, Nick? What do you think about the statement?
So I think there's a reasonable chance that the term itself may morph into something else. It's already been through that kind of process over the course of the last few years. Do I think that the issues that underpin what we call sustainability are going to disappear? Growing inequality, climate change, unsustainable production and consumption, these things aren't going away. And the focus of investors, regulators, governments, etc., on them are not going to go away. So I don't think that the issues are going to go away. Do I think that the terminology may shift over time? Yeah. These things become popular and then unpopular, but I think that the underlying rationale for why people are focused on it today will not change.
I mean, who doesn't like a good rebranding exercise? But the work must carry on. Finally, last but not the least, Sharon, your opinions on the topic, please.
Very much aligned to Nick's point. I think the underlying issues aren't going anywhere. So do I think it's dead? No, as a concept, I would say absolutely not. But I think, again, the point Diane made is absolutely right. And Nick has used the term kind of proportionate. There are certain cycles of moments where proportionately it will focus on different elements of ESG. I also think actually with the cost of living crisis at the moment and some of what we've seen, that the social element is really important. And I think there is an opportunity for organizations like ours and many others to think about how their ESG strategy can focus on supporting the social elements and lower socioeconomics individuals to support them. So actually, in some ways, the cost of living crisis, I think, to Diane's point, just maybe moves where the focus is, where the importance is. But I actually think there's quite a big focus around the social side too at the moment.
It resonates with what we hear as well. I think the word people are getting a little bit of like word fatigue using the word ESG constantly, but I think what is happening is people are moving their focus towards the underlying issues a little bit more and thinking of the climate aspects and social aspects and the controls aspect, as you pointed out, Diana, as separate items that need addressing and attention without actually getting into the whole ESG strategy branding. But I completely agree that the issues are here to stay and they should stay because they need addressing. It's been a great discussion with everybody on the panel. I have very much enjoyed the insights. I hope the viewers have as well. And like they say, every good thing must come to an end. This is what brings us to the close of this webinar. As next steps, the recording of this event will be available on our website shortly. We'll also send out links to all the participants. As I mentioned earlier, we will do a quick summary write-up and also answer questions that we unfortunately could not cover in the webinar, but we'll give you written answers to that. Finally, we look forward to seeing you next time when we are in another version of this webinar or another event with Delta Capita. And until then, thank you so much for joining and hope everybody has a lovely rest of the day or evening.